Honoring their son's work and life, we hear from the parents of journalist James Foley.
I just pray that some good can come out of this. Jim would want good to come out of this. He really would. Jim always wanted to turn the bad things into something positive.
And he spent 7 years in captivity, how a former hostage reflects on his time held prisoner in Lebanon.
When I was released, I was, like all of us, damaged in a number of different ways. You can't go through that without having some damage. But at least I lived through it.
This is Arizona Week. It's been 6 months since American journalist James Foley was beheaded in Syria, the first American killed by ISIS. James once worked for Teach America in the Phoenix area. His parents, John and Diane, say their son loved helping others, and months after his death, they're on a mission to make sure his work, his efforts, are never forgotten.
He was such a loving and caring person. He always tried to interact with the family and be part of the fun. And he was adventurous in his backyard and was always reading and playing new characters. And he was just a great person. Not a saint, but a great person.
Well, and I think family was very important to Jim. So no matter where he was in the world, he always made a point of keeping in touch with all his siblings and always was home for Christmas and holidays. So he was a real family person, you know. He kind of was the big brother of all the little younger siblings. So very precious part of our family.
Since his passing, you are trying to honor his memory, his legacy, the work that he did. How are you doing that? Tell me about the foundation.
Well, Jim was passionate about many things, but he was particularly passionate about human rights and freedom. You know, he was passionate about the freedom of the press and always cared about the underdog, whether he was a teacher in inner city Phoenix or, you know, in Syria, watching the suffering of the civilians there. So the foundation is kind of threefold goals we have, if you will, Lorraine. We're going to advocate for American hostages and their families. We're going to, we hope to build a resource center, partnering with Hostage UK, so that American hostage families can be better supported. And also the other underdog in this was Jim as a freelancer. Freelancers are in a tough spot these days. They're used a lot in the most dangerous parts of the world. And so we hope to stimulate a lot of that dialogue about freelancers, about hostage taking, and the roles of the various governments and our own media. Like, what are our roles? What can we do to protect one another? And the final role is Jim's role as a mentor. And he really cared about people knowing and understanding issues and other cultures. So that is evolving. We're hoping to do something in the way.
Yeah, and I think he felt strongly that people could succeed with the help of education or through education. So he was committed to education of people and follow-up. I think the big thing now, or the big thing that he did that isn't always done, is he followed his students into adulthood and encouraged them. Jimmy was a very encouraging person. You could sing and never be on key, and he would say, "That's great, keep practicing."
Exactly. So true. So true. He really was.
Did you as a family understand the dangers he would be facing as a freelance journalist in the Middle East?
Certainly we did. I mean, you just have to read the papers, and Jimmy would tell us some of the stories, and we saw some of his videos, so it was obvious that it's a dangerous place. And you know, I think people bring up the idea of adrenaline and that sort of thing, and I think there was some of that there, but I think he was committed to telling the truth about an atrocious situation where people were dying for their freedom, and young children had no food, no shoes, no parents, no clothes. It was just a horrible situation, and the least he could do was to, let the rest of the world know that.
I think I was rather naive. I don't think he didn't tell me as much. So I think as a mom, I don't think I realized really how dangerous it was. I really don't. I prayed for him all the time and tried to dissuade him, but, because he didn't tell many stories about the dangerous part. He always wanted to know how we were and how was the family and that sort of thing. That was Jim,
Tell me about your faith. It's really helped carry you through, and it was a big part of Jim's life in his work as well.
Well, without our faith in God, we wouldn't be sitting here, Lorraine. And I doubt that Jim would have had the courage. We're very proud of how Jim lived those last 2 years of his life. We're very proud. I mean, all the freed hostages say Jim was just goodness. He gave them hope, and he made them laugh, and that was Jim. Jim, was just full of a lot of good things, and I think a lot of that was because he prayed. Jim was really close to his God, and we and so many people all over the world were praying for Jim and the other captives, and that is our strength and our hope that some good can come out of this horrible, horrible time we're in as a world. I just pray that some good can come out of this. Jim would want good to come out of this. He really would. Jim always wanted to turn the bad things into something positive.
He wasn't interested in who wins and who loses. He was interested in preventing people from suffering. And obviously he was not in favor of the evil and cruelness associated with ISIS, but he was for people. And there are good people in all parts of the world, So I just wanted to say, when he wasn't praying, they were trying to stay healthy, and they would give each other lectures. And Jimmy would do American Lit, and one of the guys did sailing, using the blanket, and another young man did cooking. So they really worked hard at staying upbeat
and staying sane. And so we're very proud of Jim in that. We're just very proud of him, and I know it was God that gave him that strength, the strength to just be present. Jim had that gift of being present, and he was a big comfort to many of them. So we're thankful for that.
As his parents, you're now on a mission to be sure that the work that he did, the work that our military is doing, doesn't stop, doesn't end here, that it continues.
We can do better.
We
all can do better as a government, as a media. We can all do better, and hopefully it will change results in the future. Because really, honestly, the kidnapping problem is just not confined to journalists. You could go to anywhere outside of the continental United States for either education or vacation or trip, and you could be captured. And right now, there are some things that should be done to help you get out that aren't currently being done. And I think it'll take a long time for that to change, but those are things we have to, and we're committed to working on.
We do need the support of, people who value our freedom in the world and who want peace in the world. I would hope that a lot of what's going on would stimulate that conversation.
Are the two of you comfortable talking about this so-called veil of secrecy that we see surrounding Kayla Mueller's death? The government telling her family, don't talk to the media.
We were told the same thing, Lorraine.
It
was a mistake. It was a mistake for us. We can only speak for us. But we needed the power of the American media so that normal citizens and the White House could be aware of what was happening. I mean, I think the blackout only served the captors and who knows who else. It didn't serve us. It didn't serve Jim. Nobody knew. I think too few knew that there were 6 Americans in captivity in Syria.
It was a silent crisis.
It was silent. Nobody knew. And it wasn't just our Americans. There were British and French and Spanish. So it was a huge hostage crisis. But because it was quiet, nobody knew.
And I think the White House did know.
Oh, yeah. I think they knew, but yeah.
You're in extreme agony trying to figure out where your son is, what his status is, and the government is telling you nothing.
They told us 3 things for a year and a half. They told us Jim was a very high priority, Jim's situation, that they were doing everything that they could, but they couldn't tell us anything because it was all classified. And that's one of the things we want to hopefully changes in this President Obama ordered review of the hostage situation so that we can actually get important information in terms of where our government thinks people like Jim are being held, what their rough plans are to bring him home. And I think that information should be either declassified or we should sign some sort of a non-disclosure agreement or get improved security because we need that information to survive. And I'll be very honest with you, in Great Britain, they have an organization called Hostage UK, and there's several diplomats who are in constant contact with hostage families. And their goal is to get information to the family before it ever comes out in the press.
We weren't allowed to be part of the team here in the United States, and the policy was very vague for us. We really, were led to believe they were truly doing everything, when in fact, I feel that Jim and the others were a very low priority. Our government really wasn't interested in dealing with Syria, and therefore, collateral damage. So it was very, very disappointing. And we can do a lot better, Lorraine. We really can. So part of what our foundation hopes to do is to advocate for any American hostages and to improve that communication and hopefully become a resource center with the
It's a biggie.
Hostage UK. But also the freelance situation. I mean, there are issues that Jim would want us to just right. There were many wrongs here, Lorraine, and we can do better as Americans. I know we can. That's our hope.
The Foleys visited Tucson to participate in a forum, a discussion hosted by the University of Arizona School of Journalism, calling attention to the dangers journalists face working abroad. David McCraw took part in that panel. He's a lawyer for the New York Times and describes how his work has also changed.
The issues that we were dealing with 10, 15, 20 years ago have really shifted. Those times, libel, still a really big deal, not so much now. We were very much more domestic, we're now international. So in my current role, for instance, we have a libel suit in Russia, which I'm dealing with security issues for journalists, and of course, much of the last 4 or 5 years since WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, the whole area of national security and what can you publish and what you can't suddenly becomes front and center. Those are very different issues than the issues I was dealing with when I first started the New York Times 13 years ago. And one of the things I think that's happened is that when I first started, it was not uncommon if a reporter was taken by a rebel group or taken by the Taliban, a senior commander would come along and say, "What are you doing? That guy's a reporter." and it would last 15 minutes, it'd last an afternoon. Now you see a much coarser reality out there where you see the things in Syria and you see that you're dealing with people who aren't playing by the rules as if there were rules, but playing by the same sort of values that we once saw.
Everyone is fair game now, almost.
I think that's right, and they certainly understand media in a way that people who were doing harm to us or threatening harm to us 15 or 20 years ago didn't. You look at their use of Twitter, you look at their use of videos, they have the ability to capture the global stage, and that's transformed the whole way these things go down, because now, even if you're not getting a ransom, even if it's not money, it's political clout, as you will, it's getting attention for your cause.
We heard the Foleys talk a lot about that communication between the government, between the Global Post. So you're also serving as a vehicle of communication between the families, the agency they're working for, and then the government.
That's right. And I've been involved in 2 kidnappings, and I've been involved in detentions by the Libyan government and various other things that have happened to people. And one of the things that I pride myself on is being the person who can be the liaison with the government. The New York Times stands in a much better position than these families, in that we obviously, because of our name, because of our contacts, are able to get attention. But even then, it's a frustrating event, so it must be doubly frustrating for the families who don't have those kind of connections to rely on to get heard and try to get whatever assistance the government can give.
Journalists are increasingly finding themselves maybe more concerned about pursuing a story because of the legality of things. What do you say to them, or how do you encourage journalists to keep doing their job regardless of these threats?
Well, you know, the thing that I think is true of journalism is very few people got in it for the money, because they were sadly mistaken if they did. They really have a passion for the story. And in some ways, it's actually getting people to take into account the risk, reminding them of that. They can get so caught up in wanting to get the story. And what we find is that by essentially building in a process where people have to think about it, it in itself creates greater safety. Even if you're saying to somebody, before you go, fill this form out, tell us who you're going with, where you're going, who you're going to be checking in with, what time each day you're going to be checking in with, that process raises the consciousness of it for the reporter, and that's important. We don't want to stand in the way, but we do want people to take manageable risk. And as you were saying, it's a dangerous world out there, and reporters really have to be aware of their circumstances as they change day to day, hour to hour.
And now for an inside look at what it's like to be held hostage. Terry Anderson was working for the Associated Press in 1983 in Lebanon when he was kidnapped by Hezbollah militants. He spent 7 years in captivity before being released.
The goal that you have every day is to keep your emotional state level, calm, to not feel things. Because what happens is that you go up and down like a roller coaster. You get, optimistic when you hear something, and you get pessimistic when it doesn't happen, and you go up and down, and that's very bad. So you just try to coast, try to not feel things. It doesn't work very well, but you try.
Would you say that you were treated well given the circumstances?
No, I wouldn't say that, certainly not. They had no interest in killing us, because a dead hostage isn't worth much, although they did sell 3 hostages to the Libyans after Reagan bombed Libya, and they were executed. The rest of us, they tried to keep us alive. The guards were the problem. They were young, uneducated men, not all that bright, or they wouldn't have been guards. And they were given charge of people who they had been taught to consider their enemies, and they abused their power frequently. And it was pretty violent at the beginning. And then as we were moved from place to place, it would get better, it would get worse, it would get better, it would get worse. It never got good. But after a while, they stopped beating on us. And it was more or less kind of, let's just get through this and keep calm with each other. And, every once in a while, something would happen and the guards would go berserk.
Journalism can be a very dangerous industry, as we've seen.
It's getting more and more dangerous. The last 3 years, it has been more dangerous than it has ever been in our modern history.
What do you tell young people? You're a professor in Florida. What do you tell your students who are debating, is it worth it?
It's an important job. It is in many ways a vital job. It is also dangerous, and you cannot do your job if you get killed. So personal security is primary.
Who was Terry Anderson 25 years ago? And who was he when 7 years passed?
I was a brash, often arrogant correspondent who had spent a number of years in Asia and Africa covering various violent situations. I was an ex-Marine, Vietnam vet. I was a combat correspondent in Vietnam. I was a street reporter, okay? I was more interested in just knowing what was happening. Doing that kind of journalism takes its toll on you. And I have to confess there were a number of people who didn't like me very much. And they probably had reason to. But I was very good at my job, which is how I became chief Middle East correspondent for the largest news organization in the world. I loved my job. It was fascinating. Really difficult, but fascinating. Who was I 7 years later? I was the same guy. I hadn't changed my beliefs or my ideas very much. I had, of course, thought about what I had done. I didn't know if I was going to live through that. None of us did. And when you have that kind of time to think about things and you think you might die, you think about what you've done with your life. And you think about all the bad things you've done and all the good things you've done, and you think about whether your life had been worthwhile. And I thought it had. I truly believed and still believe in the importance, the power of journalism, the purpose of journalism. I hope I'd learned to be a little bit more patient. 7 years in chains will do that for you. I had a better understanding of who I was, of myself. You spend a lot of time in your head. I had a little better understanding of what was really important to me. But I hadn't really changed all that much. I've gotten 7 years older. That changes you. And when I was released, I was, like all of us, damaged in a number of different ways. You can't go through that without having some damage. But at least I lived through it. Some of them didn't. And some of them lived through it, but they were so damaged they couldn't function anymore. One hostage went straight into a mental hospital and never came out. Another spent 10 years in and out of mental hospitals. So having the support of people in the AP and having access to counseling for PTSD and things like that, I managed to get through it and keep functioning. Am I a different person today? Yeah, I'm 67. I'm a very different person. Did that affect me in any major way? I don't know. I can't say that. It's part of my life. You know, it's 7 years of my life. It's never going to go away. It's there. But it is only 7 years of my life. And there are a lot of other things that make up who I am, too. I don't know. People ask me, you know, are you over it? Are you healed? I don't know. How am I supposed to tell? You know, am I, as I say to my ex-wives, you know, am I a jerk because of that, or am I a jerk because I'm a jerk? I don't know. You tell me. You know, I'll never forget it. People ask me if it was worth it, if I, you know, would you do it again? No, I wouldn't get kidnapped on Saturday morning, but I certainly don't regret being a journalist or doing the things that I did as a journalist. I made a mistake. All of us did. If we found ourselves kidnapped, it was because we did something dumb. Right? I didn't pay enough attention to my own security. I was arrogant. I'd covered violence for a long time in Asia and Africa and the Middle East, and I thought I could keep doing it. And, you know, obviously that was a mistake.
Much different news now with The Buzz. My colleague Christopher Conover here at Arizona Public Media. And Christopher, we're talking about some new jobs report numbers that are in. Here's economist Aruna Murthy.
If you look at the recession years where we were losing month after month jobs, this forecast looks very good. So it just depends on the time frame that you're looking at, and but I would take a gain rather than a loss at any point. Considering that, I would think 2.2 is doing well. We could take more, but we'll wait and see.
And the good news there, some slow growth, about 2%, which we've seen that over the last couple of years.
But it is good news considering that we lost about 300,000 jobs during the recession here in Arizona. Any growth is good growth. And over the next 2 years, Murthy and the state are predicting continued growth. Right now, we've got about 74% of those jobs that we lost recovered. That's less than the rest of the country, but again, positive growth. Coming up in the next 2 years, they're expecting some big growth, 8% growth in leisure and hospitality here in Arizona. Education, health services, a little more than 7.5% over the next 2 years. So we are seeing positive signs of continued recovery. Granted, we're still a little behind the rest of the nation, but continued recovery nonetheless.
All right, some other big news in the state legislature this week. Higher education continues to be on the front burner.
It is very much on the front burner. We had nationwide, including here in Arizona, the protests by adjunct faculty asking for more money, longer-term contracts, and things like that. Then up at the Capitol, as the budget process continues to quietly churn along, ASU President Michael Crow sent out an email to alumni and students blasting Governor Doug Ducey's plan to cut $75 million from higher education, saying Ducey doesn't have dedication to higher education. He wants to grow the state economically, but he's cutting all this money from higher education. Crow is also upset because ASU is taking the largest percentage of that cut. The way the cut is doled out right now is a per student basis. ASU is the largest of the universities on enrollment, therefore they get the highest cut, the largest cut, and Crow is upset about that.
As we said, that $77 million, just the proposal right now. We could in fact see more. And also happening at the legislature, K through 12 education, the Common Core discussion, and we hope you'll be traveling to the Capitol next week.
The Common Core discussion is still ongoing and budget discussions are ongoing. There were some cuts to K-12, increases in some areas, cuts in others in the governor's K-12 budget. We've had school superintendents from all over the state writing to Governor Ducey, protesting those cuts. So you're starting to see some pushback from administrators to these cuts as we get closer to the budget process.
All right, Christopher Conover, thank you for your analysis, and that's our program. Thank you so much for joining us. For all of us here at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rudecka.